Great. So this is Keepside Chat with Goblinworks Mike Hines, who is the art director. Mike, can you just introduce yourself, kind of what you do, kind of what your job is, who you are?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So yeah, because we're such a small team. I have quite a few different jobs here. One being art director, as you mentioned, which is in general planning the project, having oversight over the team, giving feedback on quality, and kind of planning our overall direction, art style wise and everything. In addition, I'm doing here, because we're so tiny, I am doing all the terrain, all of the UI, and all of the effects, and some of many other things. And a lot of kind of coordinating the whole thing and checking for getting things ready for builds and that kind of thing. So that's mostly the gist of it. I also coordinate the audio for the most part, so it's a little bit crazy.
It sure sounds that way. And where'd you come from? I mean, how'd you get to Goblinworks?
So I have been doing MMOs for most of my career, actually, in the game industry. I've been in the game industry for, I think, 16 years or something, and most of it has been on MMOs, which is a little bit unusual, but it's just always been a genre I'm interested in from an art development point of view. So I didn't have any actual real direct connections, but I had some third-party connections to Mark, the CTO here, through another guy that we had both worked with at CCP. I had worked with him third-party, but other than that, I didn't really have any connections. I was doing my own thing, and I had decided that I was going to run out of money doing my own thing, so I started looking around for jobs and just happened upon Pathfinder Online, and it lined up really well with my background and experience, and I love the art style of the Pathfinder stuff, and a lot of the consistency there. So I just decided to give a call and send my stuff in, and it just worked out really well and lined up perfectly.
So you said other MMOs, like anything we'd know?
Most of my career has been spent on things kind of similar to Goblinworks, which is smaller projects that have somewhat fit into a niche category, are usually teams that are a little bit smaller, companies that are a little bit smaller, trying to do something that's a little bit different. So not any like large name MMOs for the most part. I worked for the Cyan people that did Myst and Uru and all those, and I was on Uru, which was a lot of people don't know about because it just didn't launch that successfully, but it was basically the Myst world, and it was an MMO, but it was a very strange kind of somewhat more segmented out MMO. And then I worked on a game called Gods and Heroes, which was a Roman-based MMO, like Roman mythology and history. And that same company I helped on Star Trek Online. We were doing both of those products at the same time, and then that company Perpetual shut down, and we sold Star Trek Online to Cryptic, and they finished developing it. And then I've worked on several other, like one called Lost Continents a long time ago in Colorado, and I worked on some Chinese MMOs when I was working for Epic Games China. So I worked for a kind of sister company to Epic in China, and we developed MMOs in the Chinese market. And so I was working on those as well. One called Dream World that released under a different Chinese name. But so lots of things you probably haven't heard of, but all share exactly the same problems as all MMO development. It has lots of very unique challenges. So.
And when I posted that you were coming, and I said the guy behind the art, Lisa kind of said, "Yeah, he's the art director. Are there other people doing art, or is that just kind of you? I mean, you a one-man team? How's that work?"
No, we have people doing all the different categories. So the art team actually is the largest team at Goblinworks, but we're still very small. So it's like we basically have people focused on each of the individual groups. So we have animators and character artists and environment artists and concept artists, and then I'm just taking over a lot of the other kind of subcategories that are a little bit less. Usually a little bit less content intensive, like UI and effects. Most of that stuff is done kind of to a minimal level for the game because it's basically something I'm owning in addition to a lot of other things. But we do have people covering the other base. So.
By the way, for anyone who does have questions, you can put them in here and as a PM. That'd be great. So, so you've been in Goblinworks from the start, just so I get this correct?
Not quite. I actually came on, I think, about 2 weeks before the end of the 2 weeks before the end of the first Kickstarter. So I showed up and we had a dungeon in place. We had no exterior really, and we were in quite the exciting scramble to finish the first Kickstarter. And so I came in and did a lot of the exterior work, and that would have been, I think it was October of 2010, I think, right? 2011. I can't remember what year, strangely.
So, Mike, you just opened a can of worms. You said you had a dungeon then, but there's no dungeons now. Everybody's kind of like, worried about when's dungeon coming in, and we heard things about taxes needed. And I mean, what's your thought from the art standpoint?
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I imagine most people know about that can of worms since it was playable and you could actually run around in the dungeon. But yeah, I mean, from the art side, actually, a lot of the things on the art side are not terribly complicated, with the caveat that I'll tell you a couple of kind of upfront things about the art scenario. So, as I already explained, we have very, very little manpower. So most of my previous MMOs, I've had, I don't know, 5 or 6 environment artists usually focused on environment stuff. Here we've had 2, and here we're doing much larger than what most of those games that I've worked on have done, with far less people and far less time to work on it. And so I think the reality is that we always are just at a super minimum for what we have from a manpower point of view to get things done. So it's always a bit of a challenge. And I'm not. And the second thing is, I actually meant to mention this up front. I am utterly refused to talk about dates, so just don't ask me about dates. I am happy to talk about priorities and talk about where we're going with things. But for me, it is like doing MMO development is an insane struggle all the time, trying to figure out how we're going to get what we need to get done with the team size we have. And so for me, it's most important that we focus on the right things and we work as hard as we can, and we work on the right things first. And so I'm very priority focused, but I think dates just tend to lead people into expectations. And if we can't deliver, then it just makes everybody sad, and there's no real reason for that.
Absolutely, and we usually kind of try to go, is it on the board or not? Because everybody talks about, well, I'm looking over the board and that one's on or not, as far as priorities and next steps. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. As far as the dungeons go, dungeons from an art point of view are not terribly complex, because we can basically create a dungeon set of pieces that we can put together in variable ways and make different layouts of the dungeons. Populating those dungeons with anything that's terribly interesting is a challenge, because most people think of dungeons, they think of finding cool things in the dungeon, and so it's a big challenge to create all the specific unique props and individual things that you have to into the dungeon. That being said, it's not that far-fetched for us to do it. There's some technical complications just with default Unity that make it a little bit difficult to just do things under the ground, and we are not an instance-based game, so there's a lot of complications with just the reality of it's a public space. We have blocking collision with players. We have all kinds of weird things that involve going into dungeons and what you do there. If we were an instance-based game, a lot of those things would be simpler, but it also would be a very different experience. It's not a persistent, consistent world. So from my perspective, most of the issues with doing dungeons are where they fall on a priority list. From the standpoint of our gameplay experience, for the actual gameplay, I feel like they don't necessarily rank that high. From the perspective of a cool factor and a story factor, they certainly, everyone would love to have them. Everyone here would love to have them. But often we're trying to juggle everything in the game as far as features, and so many of our features don't fit with that it's often very challenging to justify it as a priority. So, that being said, we're all very interested in it. If we can ever figure out a way to make it make sense on all of those fronts, then we would certainly love to see them do.
So I think that we've had a lot of discussion about dungeons in these Keepside chats, because everybody's asked everybody about it. And I think gameplay, you're right, but I think at the same time, being a Pathfinder game, everybody's looking for dungeons just for the nature of what Pathfinder is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally. I mean, it was. Like I said, when I first got to Goblinworks, the only thing we had was a dungeon for the demo for the first Kickstarter. So obviously, everyone's brain went there immediately, and that was the kind of native environment that feels like you should be pursuing. The reality is just that with our game style, it dropped in priority compared to the other things we needed to do. But I completely, like I said, I completely agree, and I certainly from an art perspective and from an art director perspective, I would love to see them in from that side of things, and from the pulling the Pathfinder IP and experience into the game. I would love to see that. So
I think Ryan was talking something about cameras and the way those work and those being an issue. Does that make sense?
that's definitely an issue. We haven't had much time to do much of anything with our camera, so it is relatively limited and very simple right now. But that has a lot to do with how big the caverns are. So if you make the dungeon space pretty large, which, as much as it feels weird if you're thinking about the real size of a cave, huge caves are really cool, and or tombs and whatever. And if you make it big enough, it's not that much of an issue. It's no more of an issue than walking around in a town for the most part. You can't get as high up in your bird's eye view type feel without bumping into the ceiling, but it's pretty doable.
Great, appreciate that. So a lot of people have asked questions about kind of Unity and does it work? What works, what doesn't. And there's a question about kind of Unity 4 versus Unity 5, and I know that that Comworks had to make a lot of changes because of animation and things. Can you talk a little about how it works with Unity and some of the things you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I've developed on Unity at a few different companies and on some of my own project stuff, and I feel like um, Unity has always been very kind of quick and easy to use for artists. It's very fun to get stuff in. It's very from a so one of the let me know if I use too much jargon. By the way, I'm trying to avoid it, but it's very hard sometimes.
This is a group of geeks, don't worry.
That's fair. Um, so one of the things about one of the positions we have at game companies is called a tech artist, and they are kind of a bridge between art and programming in the sense that they do very technical things that aren't quite programming, but that help get the art into the game and make it work. And from the perspective of a tech artist and an artist, Unity is very, very easy to use and very fast to get stuff into game, and allowed us to start working day one. There have been some things about it that didn't work for our particular situation that we had to adjust, and particularly, like you said, the animation stuff, we had to change out that system. But I think in general, it has been, from the art side, it has been pretty good to work with. I think on the code side, they've had some more challenges just because we're doing something that's not innately built into Unity, and in addition, it's just trying to optimize for the size of game and everything else. The scale of it is not something Unity's innately built to handle. So we're having to do at the moment we're having to do a lot of optimization. We're trying to improve the performance and everything. We made some good improvements last time, and we're working on some of that right now. And a lot of that has to do with how Unity handles the assets and how it loads them and how it unloads them and tracks them and all of those kind of things. So there's definitely a lot of challenges there that I think you hit with any engine, though. I've never worked with an engine. I worked probably 10 or 12 different engines, and I have never worked with one that didn't have the same problem. So for me, it's just every one of them has the same issues unless you custom build it. So
Is that some of that frame rate issues we've been talking about and some of those things? Is that what you're referring to?
yeah, I mean, essentially, so MMOs are the worst of the worst from a performance point of view. We basically just throw everything in the kitchen sink at the game. We want so I'm one of the downsides to being an art director on MMOs is that MMOs innately lag behind the curve on the quality point of view because we are trying to basically pile tons and tons and tons of character assets with no knowledge of exactly how many characters will be in a scene at any given time. We basically try to deal with really high thresholds of texture memory and polygon count and rendering intensity, and try to make everything look as good as it can while still leaving a really large overhead threshold for the scenarios where you have 100 characters in your scene. So all of those things hit performance, and whenever you hit those performance problems, the only way to deal with them is basically to spend a bunch of time on both the art and the programming side, optimizing what you're doing. And that sometimes that has to deal with reducing the complexity of your art assets, or finding ways to use your textures more efficiently, or coming up with level of detail variations for your characters and your world objects, so that they can be less complex at a distance. And then the programming side, there's just a ton of things to do with which assets and which pieces of the game you load in when, and how long you hold on to them, and when you clean them up and get rid of them. So there's just a ton of things that you can do, and every one of them takes time. And unfortunately, every one of them takes time away from features and from bug fixes to combat or targeting, or, pick your poison. Unfortunately, the optimization is in direct competition with game features. And so we're trying to run a balance between those things of spending time improving performance where we can, both on the art and the programming side, and continuing to get in the stuff we need to get in for the features. So
that's great. And there's been a lot of kind of feedback on, are the graphics up to the level of, are they, up to 2014, 2015 type standard, or is it, we're years behind? Any thoughts there?
I mean, I think that, reading those comments is always fascinating to me. In general, I feel like they're usually exaggerated, and I feel like people say them about everything. At the same time, I definitely think our game is not anywhere near the top of the realm as far as graphics. I think the important thing to me has been that we make a world that is cohesive, is targeting the Pathfinder art style and experience, feels like a place that you are, like you can be in and live in, and feel like it is like it's not a real place, but some place that you can accept and believe in. And then, doing everything we can with every little bit of time we get to improve it. The terrain and the world, so, I built all of the terrain. It's like 20 square kilometers of terrain or something. It's kind of an insane thing to even attempt. And, when I go home and I play Xbox games, and I look at Dragon Age, and I see these glorious foliage everywhere, and rocks placed everywhere, and really nice paths and everything. I have the same reaction. We're not anywhere near that level. That being said, we will get there eventually, I think, and it'll just take, it takes getting to the point where the game is successful enough that we can afford more programmers, and we afford more environment artists. A lot of those games that you see that have the really high-end graphics, they have people hand placing a lot of things. We just can't even remotely do that. We basically have to figure out really good systematic programmatic solutions for creating really large-scale games that are still explorable and playable as an individual player on the ground. Really, really difficult problem. We basically had to get custom software, or get software specifically for that. And I've developed, in conjunction with our programmers doing some scripting, probably, I don't know, a 1,000-step process in order to run through and do the process, basically somewhat procedurally build the terrain, but it requires a ton of manual input to do. And so a lot of those things I'm very aware of. I imagine I'm probably as aware of anyone as of all of the things that are shortcomings. For me, it's just a matter of juggling lots of different priorities and trying to find time that we can to do any polish, including taking programmer time to do things like improving the tools for doing the programmatic terrain, and coming up with things for procedural foliage and grass, and those are the things that I would love to improve. But I'm kind of most focused on the terrain shortages, because I'm the most aware of them. I feel like our characters are pretty solid, although I think we could be doing more with them. And obviously it would be nice to have more NPCs and more creatures and more variants of those things. So.
All right, you brought up the magic word. What about the grass? I'm going to quit the game because the grass is terrible. I heard all about that forever.
Yeah, I know. I've heard quite a bit about it. I get ribbed about it pretty regularly. The grass is unfortunately mostly going to take away from programming time. It is so essentially what I do right now is I create height maps in the tools called Grom, and I build the height maps based on all kinds of things, like monster hexes have certain procedural processes, and I do some hand adjusting to them, and I make them kind of have some themes, and then the broken lands and broken hexes will have different things to them, and then I will kind of get that base in, and then I will go back in and I will run a bunch of different procedural things to do some simple noise and some basic erosion type things. I have hand paint all the rivers, and then that stuff all gets basically that stuff generates the height map, and then from the height map I generate using a bunch of different template kind of elevation and slope based things. I generate a bunch of I generate the grass masks, and then the grass mask determines where grass gets placed in the world. That is the extent of what art does on the grass side. Essentially, I came up with I made a few grass billboards, what we call billboards, which are just little two flat things that render as the grass in the game. I made some basic ones of those, but we can only use essentially whatever grass is there for the entire world. We don't have a way to say put marsh grass in the swamps and put put wheat and barley in the plains. Like that requires extra programming time and extra effort in order to be able to create different masks on the Grom side that then get read in to place the grass in different places in the world. All of that stuff is done kind of systematically and procedurally, and so it essentially comes down to me working with a programmer, taking away from, I don't know, any of the other things that everyone wants, to get better grass in the game. I mean, I guess if we have a ton of people who say that really is a critical thing to them, I know that we've had some people say it very, very vocally, but if we really feel like it's a major issue for people, then we will certainly take time away from combat or feuds or systems or whatever, pick a thing and do that instead. It has not seemed like it met that level of priority previously, so we haven't done that. But that's essentially what it takes, is taking away from those things. So
I think that player actually left.
Yeah, I heard that he has departed us now. My failure to deal with grass. Sorry.
Don't worry, I'm not one to lose sleep over the grass. So you also mentioned there, and I just want to circle back about the forums, and kind of the people that allowed others. Some people have said, and kind of the questions, hey, how about hearing more from the art directors, seeing some images, those type of things on the forums? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something that has been a struggle this entire time. So most of my previous jobs, I have gotten a pretty big chunk of my time has been devoted to community, like materials for the community, PR materials, marketing materials, making sure that we get good screenshots cataloged of all of our stuff, and that we have really good renders of all of our characters. We're just tiny, and there's any time that is spent on that is another thing that takes away from the time on the game. That being said, I think we are suffering from some degree of there's tons and tons of Twitch feeds of the game out there, but very, very seldom are they run at decent quality settings. There are very few good screenshots out there. There's not many good renders of our characters that are nicely composed and set up. And that's the type of stuff that I would love to be doing. I feel like every day is a struggle to get the things that are on the top of my list, and that never quite feels like it's at the top. But I did just do a thing, we just had an art meeting today, and I was just talking about the fact that we want to do some art blogs, and we want to release some shots of some old stuff that we just haven't ever gotten to really prep and release, and get some blogs prepped for some new things. And I also just I guess last Friday, switched Darren, our concept artist, over to working on those types of materials, working on PR marketing, and he just showed a painting he had done today of one of the existing suits, just doing a really nice illustration of it. And we talked about other things we can do that will show things that we have for release coming up, and that we can put things paired up more with blogs. So I feel like a broken record, because the reality is it always just comes down to, well, there's just not enough time, and it's what I really, really want to be able to do. But when, all the terrain, all the UI, all the effects, I just made the audio or the elementals. So, it's a bit of a crazy day most days. And that's the type of thing that, as much as it is really important, if it slides, people don't get really upset in game. If other things slide, everyone is like, why didn't this stuff get done, or why didn't the release come out, and those kind of things. So it's a very challenging lifeboat day on most days.
I don't know if I'd go, people don't get upset in game, but it's just a different group that's yelling in different directions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that I totally feel like it's justified to feel like, I think people often want to be able to invite their friends and get other people into the game. And I feel like it certainly is a problem that there isn't enough material showing higher quality visual aspects of the game, or showing things that are enticing to people to get them into the game. And I'm very aware of that problem, and very upset by that problem. I will certainly do my best to try to address it, and I'm working on it as some right now, a little bit more aggressively. So
Great. And you mentioned something in passing, but I want to go back to, how about the rivers? And you're saying you create those, and everybody's kind of wondering, when are they coming? When are we going to see more? Are they actually going to impact the game? Things like that.
Yeah, the rivers. So the rivers are not there because it's not raining. That's what we decided. No, I'm just kidding. We talked about the rivers day before yesterday again. We talk about them pretty regularly. I think it's kind of crazy that we're in the river kingdoms and have no rivers. But fortunately, they fall into the same category as things like the grass. So essentially, I have hand painted the rivers in Grome, like basically went down with a brush and actually carved them all out. We don't have so it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit harder to explain, but probably makes sense to a decent number of people. So right now, the only way to make the rivers work would be to put a giant reflective plane below pretty much everything in the world, which would have a really bad impact on performance. This is the only way I could do it, because it's just too large of an area for me to manually make any of the river surfaces. So essentially, in order to put rivers in, we'd have to greatly negatively impact the entire game, and it just hasn't made sense to do that. The other option, the thing we need to do in order to get them into the game, is we need to somehow extract the painted mask data that I've made, create 3D objects out of it, and import those into the world, into the proper locations, and then get them all set up with their materials and their shaders and everything. So that, unfortunately, just requires a decent bit of programming time. We have to turn 2D painted masks into 3D geometry, and that's not something that's just innately built into any of the tools. So we'll have to develop that tech in order to do it. Or we come up with some other solution, but there's just, because of the scale and the scope, there's no hand building of those things. And unfortunately, all those water surfaces have to much be built in order to make them show up. Once they're there, the rivers are built in a way, so actually they're not realistically built, but they are built in a way that they don't ever slope up, which is when they're going downstream, which is at least good. They're actually built flat. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those pie in the sky features, but I built them that way so that if we can ever have some kind of boat traffic, that they could actually function. I don't have any idea if that's something that we will be able to achieve, but it is set up that way from an art side asset point of view. As far as anything else goes, I built them intentionally and very painfully at exactly the right height, so that at least humans are, in. Is
it just me, or we lose Mike?
Lost him.
You lost me?
Yeah, sorry. You're back now.
Oh, weird. Okay, maybe something happened when I pushed talk. What was the last thing you heard?
You were starting to say about humans.
Oh, I was saying, yeah, at least the humans are, like, the height of the water level was made so that humans were in it, and I thought they were more at waist level, but it turns out they're more at chest level, which means that the dwarves are under the water. So that wasn't really intentional, but The water right now in the game is really just it's really just a plane with a material on it. It doesn't have volume in the sense that it's creating differences in movement or anything like that. Once we have stuff that's constructed to be right where the water surfaces are, then we can feasibly do things like have it affect movement speeds and things like that. So it is something we probably will end up doing. But one of the things about developing a terrain like we've done is we had to develop a really large environment so that we could do all the territorial control stuff. That was the driver of the scale of our environment, and having the population base be able to have settlements that were divided up at the right distances to make it feel right. That means making a big gigantic world and not really having a lot of ability to make sure that things are cleanly balanced and controllable. So I tried as much as possible to have it so that rivers were not places that would totally block passage, because that just creates very distinct possible problem cases where people are trapped or create kind of traps for other people and that kind of thing. In general, they're a little bit bland because of that, but I do hope that we can do some more things to make the edges of the rivers more interesting and get some more kind of cool rock formations and stuff running along the sides of them. And I want to make awesome waterfalls, if at all possible, because everyone likes awesome waterfalls.
And I'm going to follow up with two questions. The first one is really, I'm assuming filling the rivers with water is not on the map sometime soon, correct?
It's something that we've kept a list of things that we want to try to get to for a very long time. It just has never quite made it to the top. Every day some new thing comes in that we need to pay attention to. Often it's a bug or a critical issue in the game. But it is not leaving our list, and we're all very conscious of it. And I'm probably more conscious than anyone of it. It makes kind of disturbing to me, but it is so. I mean, if we can figure out get a window of time for me and the illustrious Richter. I heard that everyone mentions Richter by name and no one knows who he is, and he seems like some mysterious figure. He's the programmer that works on most of the art stuff with us too, but he also has like 20 other responsibilities like everyone here. But if we can get some of his time, then that he would also help me figure out some way to get that done and get it in game.
Great. And then the other one, since you brought it up, one of our favorite things we send our university members for, and many others do, is doing a little base jumping off of the Thornkeep waterfall. But it's a little weird that it just comes out of the middle of nowhere. Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, that is a side effect of not having water in the game. I mean, there should be water extending right to the edge of where it comes off of, but ultimately I decided that, random underground spring creating waterfall felt cooler than not having waterfalls, so I put one in. I can certainly take it out if it bothers people, but I don't, to me it feels like there's so many things at this stage of the game that are clearly not ideal and not finished that it feels like adding cool things in where we can, even if they don't quite connect, still seems better than not doing it. But I'd be interested to hear feedback on that, though. I don't know.
It's kind of a balancing act. I think it's just one of those that people have jumped out and said, it's really fun to jump off the waterfall, but where's it coming from?
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a little odd. When I did it the first time, I was like, I don't know if I should be putting these in yet, but I went ahead and left that one in because it looks pretty.
It's cool. Hey, so you talk about cool things. We'll get back to art in a minute, but everybody that's come here has kind of explained what makes them, either have geek cred or something cool. Lisa owns Yoda, and we've got some divers and real bowyers. I mean, what's your cool geek thing you do?
So I do a lot of things on the creative side. I played some D&D back in college, and I play some Pathfinder now, but I can't make a lot of claims to that. I've always been a bit of a pretty serious sci-fi geek, and I've always been pretty into that side of things. But I'd say my most of my time outside of work and most of my focus is on some combination of fine art, illustration stuff, and music, and I do a lot of that. I just updated my website today. I've got luminousmachine.com is my kind of my personal website, and it has all of my other stuff. And I'm also really interested in doing games that have I have a company called, like my own company called Sparklight Studios, that I'm interested in doing games that are like positive social change games, things that have a good impact on society. And I have a lot.
Lost you again, Mike.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's last thing you just started talking about the social change, and I was getting really excited.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So basically I have a company that's built around that. It's just me, but that's built around building games that have social improvement characteristics. Now, I haven't done anything on that since I started at Goblinworks effectively, except for a small game where I made a very spherical unicorn called Unicorb. And that was in conjunction with a group at UW that was doing a technology thing where we did neural input and muscular input control for the character in the game. And so it was meant for people with handicaps and things to be able to control things and do things with their mind and or their muscles. So I do some of that kind of thing. I basically can build a game for the most part from start to finish, with the caveat that I can't do a lot of complex programming. I do scripting and things as well, and I write the music for them. So I love to just get into Unity and be able to build an entire project. And so I have many of those kind of geeky but not geeky in the serious geek cred way, just in the creative way.
Very cool. I'm sure you need a whole lot more people visiting your website.
Promotional.
You'll have to open up a side business of having, people's favorite character from Pathfinder Online made into some big mural or something, or whatever, a real detailed image.
Yeah, I actually, a friend of mine who is in the scene, I don't know what he goes by in the scene, but he just asked me if I would do a character concept for him, and it's a lightly armored half elf, or is it half? No, it was a lightly armored halfling female riding on a dragon squirrel. So I'm going to do that for him, I think, because that sounds awesome.
All right, cool. We'll put in our obnoxious questions and requests for images later. All right, so that brings me to actually cool questions everybody's asking about is gnomes. They working? They coming in the path? What's you working on them? What's going on?
So we are actually we have done some hairstyle design for them. We are actually going to probably start some work on base body stuff for them relatively soon. Basically because of the nature of them being relatively close in proportion to humans, I think we're going to be able to do a lot of pretty quick retrofit of a lot of the equipment and the animations and everything to them. So I don't think they're a long way off, but I don't have any real sense of exactly what the data is on them yet, because we have to juggle them with a number of other things. But we are working on them, and we actually just finished up some concepts for some of the hairstyles and stuff. So they're on the list, and they are in our current pile of tasks. So
we'd love to see some of the concept art, even if it's just concept.
Yeah, it's a little bit. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about the character concept stuff, we have because we're working with Paizo and on Pathfinder, there's so much existing concept that for some things we actually don't do a lot of new concept work. So for the gnomes, we're unlikely to do a whole lot of new concept work because we're essentially retrofitting most of their suits and from the existing suits, because that's really the only thing we can do from a bandwidth point of view right now. Long term, we hope to add some more like very specific race-based, race-influenced suits. But in the short term, essentially what we're doing is taking the existing suits and putting them on those characters, which doesn't require any kind of concepting. And we're basically starting with some of the iconics and some of the existing Pathfinder concept art to define the faces. So we really do very little concepting for we have done very little concepting for the player races, other than we did We did some face work for the dwarves because it was a little bit, you could play a little bit more in that, and people don't seem to be as specific about it. We have done we've done some hairstyle stuff for them, but that's pretty much it for the most part when we do concept stuff. So unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of them, other than doing what we're doing now, which is taking some time just to do some cool concept stuff and some cool renders. So we might get some out just because we're doing that, just making cool stuff just for the purpose of release. So we'll try to do some of that. Unfortunately, we're usually very utilitarian. We basically make concepts for stuff we definitely need concepts for, and for other things we use the existing Paizo stuff.
Anything on new classes at all?
Not right now. I mean, it's something that I know that we want to get more distinct feedback from the community on, and that's something we're working on. So we're still on that side of it, which is trying to get feedback on what it is that we should be doing. Most of our classes that we had on the list for things that we could do, the classes break up very distinctly into different buckets because some of them require a lot of animation work, some require a lot of new suits, so from on the art side, some require a lot of, like on the programming side, they require completely different feat stuff and things that are more complex. So they're not they're not terribly comparable, and what we need to do is put some of the different classes into buckets that are comparable to let the community give feedback on which one they would prefer of the ones we can actually do. We basically try to find find classes that we can add with the least overhead, but still get the gameplay benefits of it. So unfortunately, it's not so simple as just pick whichever class you would like. It's much more about, we need to figure out good buckets to have them in, and then let the community give us input on what they'd like to see out of those buckets.
Appreciate that. Although rumor has it there's some type of mule or something coming for helping us to move these bulk goods. Any insights?
We've got a nice little mule that we've made on the art side. I don't know that I will give any more specifics on that, but he's pretty adorable. So
adorable. That's really the word you had to go with.
Yeah, it's a mule. They have big ears and kind of funny faces. They're pretty adorable. I don't know.
Great. You took your lead from Eeyore, right? It sounds like.
No, I mean he's a pretty standard looking mule, but he has a nice pack on him, and yeah. So we've made cool art assets, and that's about all I can say about it at the moment. So.
That's fair. Also, people have asked about the map and the size. Is it too small? Should it be bigger, growing? And one of the chats we had with one of the developers, like, well, if you asked Mike about increasing the map, his head might explode.
Yeah, I almost died a couple times early on from the amount of work it took to get AE out the door. So people started being concerned for my health. The reality is that from an art perspective, it's time investment, but it's a pretty known task at this point. It's just thousands of steps for me, but I can do pretty large chunks of terrain at a time. I would much rather personally spend the time on improving the existing terrain and making it feel better and getting more work on polishing that than adding more terrain. I don't feel like there's any population constraint for the most part on that front. I know that I think there's been some, people wanting settlements who don't have them and things like that. The gameplay, so I don't know that adding more space just so people can freely grab new settlement spaces is necessarily a good justification for it, but I haven't been in most of those conversations. It's not really my realm. For the most part, I'm like, if design decides that we really need to have more terrain, then I will figure out how to make it happen and probably not sleep very much for a while.
Yeah, I seem to remember something about don't break the mic.
Yeah, it became a theme here and online apparently, and I was sleeping at the office for about an hour, maybe. Some of the times I just didn't go to sleep for quite a long time there, so I would really prefer not to do that, but I do what I got to do. So.
Yep. So the message I've gotten out of that is don't expect the map to grow anytime soon.
Well, like I said, if design tells me they really need the map to grow for some reason, and there's a really good, strong reason for it, I will figure out how to make it happen. So,
I think the two questions people ask kind of is the map going to grow, and if so, which way? But I'm assuming that's a design question.
yeah, that's more of a design question. It has more to do with resources, specific locations, and it doesn't have a lot to do with me. There's certain things about how we expand the map that make it more or less complicated for me to do on the art side, but they're not probably gating factors. Unfortunately, when we did the land rush, we didn't connect the dots very well, and so I ended up doing a lot more terrain than I probably would have needed to if we had spent a little bit more time planning and connecting the dots on exactly what needed to get done, because I have to do the terrain in really large, specific size chunks because it's very procedurally done, and so I have to basically pick I don't remember the size right now, but a really large chunk and do it at once. And we unfortunately went just over the border into several of those chunks during when we were going to doing land rush, and so I had to develop these big, huge swaths of land that we only used a small section of on one edge.
All right. So a couple other fun ones: capes, hats, fezzes. What's coming?
So we'll probably have some more hats in not too long. Capes are tricky. So capes are essentially held up right now because of a bug in the way that our skeleton for our characters was set up. There was a very specific inverted scale problem on a bunch of the bones, which then propagated out to every single character and every single animation. And that didn't get recognized until after a lot of that stuff was in place. And so unfortunately it has taken quite a bit of time for us to go back and fix those issues. So I think that we will have them in not too long, and we are working on them. So that's distinctly on the docket. The hat stuff, like additional hats and things, those are more just like stuff we would do in the future, but that aren't distinctly queued up right now. We just do them in batches when we can get to them. So,
how about some of the buggy stuff, like Captain's Chain +2 not working on female elves, and I've got Hidden Steel Helm that comes up as whiteout some days. I mean, some of those things.
Interesting. So, I mean, part of the problem is just getting those things back to me to the point where I know about them. Like, I know I just got one about some boots that were whiting out the other day, and we fixed those right away. We will often do the fixes right away. It's just sometimes the loop on getting really minute bugs like that, or smaller, really focused bugs, back to me is sometimes a challenge. So, I think, I mean, maybe I might start a forum location or something that people can report graphical glitches, although sometimes people have a hard time differentiating what is and isn't a graphical glitch that art can handle, but I could at least pass them on to the programming if they're not. So I can try to do something about increasing creating some kind of channel that people can get those bugs to me a little bit more directly. I unfortunately don't. I'm pretty nose to the grindstone all the time, and I don't spend enough time on the forums, and I really should spend more time getting more feedback. A lot of the things that are wrong I know are wrong, and I'm kind of focused on fixing them, but I would like to get some more feedback and spend some more time hearing about things that are bothering people on a daily basis or that they're dealing with.
Yeah, and we should submit them through the bug submit inside in the game for now, or
those get to me at least some of the time. So as far as I know, those are still, those seem like a good way to do it. Although I didn't, I hadn't heard about the Hide and Steel Helm, so I don't know why that hasn't gotten back to me. I know about the Captain's Chain one. We have a fix for that, I think, done, but I don't think it's actually in the build yet. So I do get them most of the time, but there's a lot of small bugs in those that get submitted through the system. So sometimes it's challenging. So I think it's the best way to do it from the standpoint of it is cataloged and it's in the system, and it is more likely to get to me in a way that's a real bug. Whereas the forums I may or may not see, but I would also like to get a place where people can give me feedback to say, this release, it felt really buggy on the visual side, or there were a bunch of things that got screwed up, or people, like, I know one of the things that bothers me is I do wish we had more of our suits had unique meshes for them, or unique assets for them, and that's just a bandwidth limiting thing. But I'd like to get more sense for what people are looking for and what people want on that front. And we need more. It'd be nice if we could get more distinct, kind of almost numerical feedback on, how many people want certain things, like some kind of voting poll type thing and stuff. So,
yeah, I know there's been talk about doing this. Any future for us to be able to adjust our settlements, things like that, flags or our own banners or logos or anything like that?
All of those things have been discussed pretty extensively. It is, our settlement plan does include a lot of customization stuff. We hope long term to have the settlement colors and company colors and all that kind of thing be able to be used to set all aspects of your settlements and your buildings and everything. We've got some of those systems in now. It's just a matter of tying in some things that need to get done on both the programming side and adding a lot more. One of the things that I have on my list right now is I want to add a lot more banners and flags and colorful elements to the buildings and the settlements and the holdings and the outposts and everything, just to get more color into the world, along with some vegetation and things like that. And those would innately be set up to be colored. Whether or not they can immediately be colored is a little bit more of a complicated question about hookup and programming side. But it is definitely, it's all in the plan to do a lot of that color-based setting stuff, and it's all in the plan to let people, the settlement stuff. I don't know how much, I can't remember how much detail has been gone into with the design, but we definitely intend to let people, choose all their buildings and place things and do all of that kind of thing. So the way we do that may be maybe a little bit more in-world, like we're doing the holdings and things like that, but it is intended to be part of that whole system, letting you customize that. I'm trying to think if there was so that was colors and settlement stuff. Was there anything else that you'd asked about specifically with customization thing?
I think the other one would be, either being able to customize armor or maker's marks or logos on your shields, things like that.
Right. So logos are a much trickier problem. Basically, getting them onto the different geometry requires either really fixing it into the design, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of right now, or coming up with some way to do it that's an overlay. We certainly can do it on things like capes and shields relatively easily. When it gets to the more complex armor suits, it's always about identifying a location on the suit that you can have it, and then there's a lot of technical challenges with having a way to map that image in a clean way onto the surface, because that's not something that is, there's a very complicated problem there with regard to how we put the details and paint the details onto the surface of the models. It is doable. It's another thing that requires some programming time, and which is always tightly held around here. And then, we also have the complication of how you get the logo in the first place. If you can do a logo designer that has certain restrictions on it, you can do it relatively easily. That obviously requires some time investment of making the UI and figuring out how to make the logos, like figuring out what the clip art is and the bases and things like that. And then in addition to that, you have some degree of quality control and censorship that has to be applied when people are making their own art and putting it in the game. So not to use censorship in the negative way, but I think everyone knows what the immediate graphics that will be made if you add any kind of system to the game to make graphics. So there's some pretty significant complexities in there. I'd love it if people could just submit their own art, but you immediately get things that are really incredibly offensive whenever you do that. So we have to be kind of conscious of that.
Yeah, just keep in mind some people on the forums are willing to pay if they can do customizations or something along those lines.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's an I mean that's an interesting point. So there are a lot of things on the art side that if we could add a body, we could do, as far as things like that, like being able to vet community given created art and things like that. We would need a person, but we need enough of that to justify an entire new person, and we need it to be a pretty consistent cash flow and all those kind of things in order to add a person just to do that kind of thing. At the moment, we don't. It doesn't matter how much you want to pay us because, oh yeah, I mean, within certain realms, but generally it's, the reality is the things that we need to add to the game on the art side are just more important than relatively small amounts of money from that kind of microtransaction. We just don't have enough people to take advantage of that, and usually there's not enough consistent demand for it to justify adding an entire new person to your art team. But it's an interesting. We've talked about that some. We talked about the idea of doing more on-demand art where the community says, here's something we want, and it's a big enough thing from an art side that we can add a person or something. That's similar to the type of crowdforging stuff we did when we were doing the Kickstarter, and it's certainly it's not outside the realm for me. I think it's sometimes a challenging thing to identify things that actually are that significant and can justify that ad. And we also want to. Our main focus is delivering a really good game for the people that already paid us money and are already in the game playing and everything else. So we want to make sure we continue to focus on that and not get too distracted by trying to add a lot of that type of content. But if there's enough demand for it in the community and there's enough of a stir about that thing, we certainly can look into it and try to do it.
We'll have to work with Lisa on a business plan. Got it.
Exactly.
So I do have to ask one last question, just because if I don't, my friends from Fortune will get really mad. How about actually being able to make, in their case, a dwarven settlement? Subterranean, noises of anvils, a little different environment. Is that anytime soon, or is that kind of just a pipe dream right now?
Unfortunately, at the moment, that's a pipe dream. Now, it sounds awesome, and if we move the direction of having dungeons, and we're able to deal with all of the various design and technical complexities of doing that, and build the art assets for it. Actually, it would just be additional art assets probably, because we probably couldn't use a standard tile set dungeon set for it. But it's to some degree, it's not that much different than having a settlement outside, as long as the space is not confined and you can get in and out of it very easily in a lot of different ways. I don't think that's that far-fetched but it first requires that we move the direction of being able to solve all the dungeon problems from a design perspective and a technical perspective, and we have time to generate some art for it, because we'd probably have to make actual like a geometry base, as opposed to right now the terrain is all a big height map, and so that's done in a very different way than what you would have to do if you made a dungeon surface down under the terrain. So that's got some specific art challenges, because we'd have to build a bunch of foundational elements for it.
Great. So one last question, sorry, that I forgot to ask you before. What have we as players done that surprised you?
That is a good question. I'm kind of constantly surprised by the speed with which players become aware of and identify things in the world. I say I'm surprised. I've been surprised my entire career. MMO players have a fascinating ability to spend amazing amounts of time doing things that I can't even imagine they can achieve. So in general, there's that. I think I don't think there's been a lot of things that were that surprising beyond the general speed of that kind of thing. I have been really happily surprised by the nature of the community in the Pathfinder environment. Like I feel like having worked on a number of other MMOs and having done a lot of research into MMOs, I'm actually not that much of an MMO player. I'm a very big developer of them, and I love creating the worlds, and I love creating the variety of characters and everything else. But I have done a lot of paying a lot of attention to MMOs for my entire career, and I feel like the community for Pathfinder is just vastly more connected to each other and to the IP, and has a better sense of community than anything else I've encountered when I've been working on them. So that's a very, very pleasant surprise. And I kind of expected it a little bit after, first meeting Lisa and talking about Paizo and learning more about the Pathfinder community, but seeing it actually extend into the world environment has been very, very pleasant surprise that I didn't really expect.
Great, and I do hear you on the MMO, but I happen to know, I think you're working on a Sanctum and doing some engineering.
No, I'm playing our game, and actually, I will tell you that, and this is not a, I obviously have the danger of being biased, but I find this game vastly more interesting than any other MMO I played, because I don't like being handheld through a bunch of quests. It's not interesting to me. I don't want to play if I'm playing a story-based game that is really story-based and where there's really good characters, really good writing, and it's narrative and it takes me through an experience that's emotional, I can totally get into that. That's great. But generally MMOs, because of the nature of it, you can't create that environment because everyone's doing the same things. And most MMOs, that's what you do. You just go in and you run through this set of quests and you do exactly the same thing as everyone else. And that is not at all what it is to get into this game. And when you get into this game, it is just a world of people, and it's a social world, and there's all kinds of awesome interactions and things to do. And Lisa's giving me tasks left and right. She loves to do that. She's probably listening to me, right? She's still listening to me. Yeah, I see her.
I'm there.
Amen.
So I get lots of requests to do very specific things, and I've got 3 characters that I've got trained up, and one of them I've had since the beginning. So it's super cool to play this game. I'm just not generally into MMOs, but I am definitely into ours. So
great. Well, thank you very much, Mike. We're going to end the formal session now. This has been from Pathfinder University. For a list of classes, go to class.pathfinderuniversity.com. Mike, if you want to hang out and answer a few questions to the open group, that's great. If not, if you have to run, that's okay too.
Yep, happy to do it, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you guys. Appreciate it.
Great. Open the room. Cheetle, you get to go second. Anyone else?
I'll go first. I got a question about how high the priority is to have the different armors look differently, because several sets of the armor are identical, but they're called different things, like Captain's Chain and Priest Scale, and the Bandit Armor and the Oaken Steel.
Yeah, so actually, I mentioned that a few minutes ago, actually, that it's definitely something that bothers me, and I would like to get more of those suits, more of the unique suits in. We have a bit of a conflict because on one side, we have to be prepared on the art side for people to get to tier 3 stuff. And so we have a lot of work to do because that's essentially building an entire set of armor for everyone. So we have to do that. We have to do that in time for people to get to it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when it takes a month plus to build a suit of armor, per person, and you have a very tiny team, it becomes something you have to really plan for well in advance. So we're going to try to juggle in some of those suits, though. Unfortunately, the cleric fighter crossover suits, like the priest scale and the captain's scale, those will probably remain like that for a while, because the reality is they're essentially the right basic idea for the suit. I would love to have like a fighter version of each suit and a cleric version of each suit, but they're meant to basically have that overlap from a class point of view. And so at the moment, we that would probably be the lower priority of the new suits we needed to create. We'd be more focused on suits that just really didn't have a counterpart like that. But we are definitely keeping track of it, and that's one of the things I was saying. I'd like to figure out a way to get some better feedback from the community on which suits really feel like they don't match, for instance, like that they just don't even make sense with the suit that's in there. I mean, I can probably come up with that too, but I'd love to get feedback from the community on what people would like to see as far as next tier 1 and tier 2 suits that they'd like to see built. I'm assuming it's probably the tier 2 that people would be more interested in. But
yeah, I think the Oaken Steel Splint, you see a couple of votes on that one. Other questions for Mike? Shield, now's your turn. Or G-Wiz, you had something?
Yeah, I got one comment that everybody I've head asked to play the game, the one thing they can't stand about the artwork is only where the location of the hit points and mana and stuff is right near your character.
Yeah.
Everybody I've invited to play the game says, "Hey, great game, move the hit points."
Yeah, so I'm not going to fully pass the buck on that one per se, but that's more of a reality of that was not actually supposed to be there. So the way the hit point bar is supposed to work is that it is supposed to sit anytime you are out in the distance. It's supposed to go kind of a decent bit below your feet, and visually. And then when you get back to the bar, it was supposed to ideally dock on the top of your hotbar, so it never went.
Lost your mic.
Oh, sorry. What did you lose me at?
Dock at the top of the hit bar.
Right. So essentially that's how it was supposed to function. It's just additional programming work to get that to work because it's some relatively dynamic behavior that's not built into any of our UI system stuff. But good to hear about it again because I honestly forget about that one sometimes because I've just gotten so used to it. So I personally have not heard it mentioned around me, but it might be floating around on the programming side or on the design side.
Yeah, that's just the only thing that all my friends say. I can't stand that hit bar being right there. But other than that, they love the game. They keep playing it. So.
Well, I mean, I'll definitely keep it in mind and mention it again to Cole and see if we can look at it again sometime soon.
That'd be good. No hurry.
Great. Are you just asking the type, saying, "Hey, anything we should expect coming out of art? Besides mules and gnomes and things like that."
Like I said, we're going to try to do some more. We're going to try to do some more kind of PR and marketing material, community materials. One of the things I've been wanting to do for a while was, I have given some one-off materials to people, but we've been trying to, like Ryan and I have been trying to coordinate getting a bunch of the materials released for the community. So things like all the icons and all the map stuff and all of the kind of core materials that are needed to kind of make community-based resources. That's something I've wanted to release for a while. We also want to do like I said, some more kind of just renders, good screenshots, like particularly like renders of a bunch of our equipment and things like that, and characters. I mean, you'll have seen the dude hanging out in the cage in Thornkeep, I imagine. So that's coming your way pretty soon. We will have some. I just got done working on the elementals, and they're pretty cool. And then, other than that, we are working on. We're doing some tier 3 suit stuff. We do have some more. I don't know that it's been announced, but I feel very comfortable saying that we're kind of on a slightly interesting and different note. We're releasing some dress versions of the freeholder and the expert suit stuff. So you're going to be able to wear a dress regardless of who you are in the game. So I'm expecting to see lots of male dwarves running around in dresses soon, which is going to be awesome.
All right. One or two more questions for Mike before he has to go and we don't break the mic.
I have two quick questions.
So I had to wander off for 15 minutes, so I'm not sure how much detail or if this was asked. So how comfortable are you with the current level of detail pop-in stuff? Because right now I think the render distance for NPCs is, 50 meters or something? And it's straight pop-in?
Well, there's two different pop-ins. One of the pop-ins is based on your awareness radius, which is, I think, what you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about the straight not the... Well, actually, no, keep on going. I might actually be talking about what you're talking about.
So there's an awareness distance where your client becomes aware of other characters, both NPCs and player characters. And that at that distance, they just appear. We don't have any plans at the moment for the extra work to make those fade in, but it is something we've discussed. I can certainly see where put that on our list of art request type stuff, because I would like to see that as well. There's also level of detail fades, which doesn't affect characters much at the moment right now, but for like props in the world and buildings and things like that, right now we do a immediate swap between the different LOD levels, and that's kind of harsh in a lot of places, and I'd like to get that fixed. The distance one, as far as your perception awareness, the only thing we can do is add basically a hard pixel-based fade between it being there and not being there, which I would like to get in. So it is something that we will try to do at some point. I just don't know when it's going to fit in the priority list.
I have two quick questions.
Yeah, it's just the primary issue I have with the game art design right now is running upon a group of players, and there's about 5-second freeze up as you pull all of our models in, because I think the game's trying to pull in the high def models, the high poly models for them, and it's
a
real kicker.
Yeah, so we actually have no low LODs of characters in the game right now, which is kind of insane, but it's also a huge amount of work. And so that's one of the things that we are working on as far as performance optimizations. That being said, that's not going to necessarily solve the problem you're seeing. The problem you're seeing is just because I actually believe, I'm not certain of this and we're still trying to figure it out for sure, but I actually believe that it's the animation sets that are killing us. And basically what happens is every time you run into a new gender race combination, so if you've never seen a female dwarf in the game in this game session and you encounter a female dwarf, it will load all the animations for the female dwarf. The suit itself is not much of an asset, so it's not that big of a deal to load, but those animations, so the reason I believe that's what it is when we added all of the proper animations for all of the offhand animations for the weapons, that's when we saw a really dramatic increase in the load time for those, I think. A lot of this stuff's really hard to narrow down because you can basically hit a threshold and all of a sudden everything will get worse. But it's not the thing that you just added that made it worse. It was just one of the things, and it pushed you over a threshold. So a lot of times, while it seems like it's this thing, it may not be. So I can't say for sure, but when we put those dual wield animations in, that basically almost doubled the number of animations per character per skeleton in the game. And I think that's probably what is causing a lot of those problems. So Richter is actually spending a lot of time right now looking at asset loading and timing on asset loading and figuring out ways to do that in a way that don't cause hitches. But it's always a complex problem because you have to do that alongside everything that's being done in the game otherwise. And you can cause all kinds of blocking issues and things.
My two quick questions are hairstyles sticking through hoods. Is there any plans on fixing that in the near future, or is that something that's far off?
Actually, I think we can fix, for all the hoods that we actually have in, those should all get fixed pretty soon. One of our problems is that we have a lot of other hoods and helmets and things, quite a few of which we've actually made, but we need a more complex system for swapping out pieces to load when we load in those helmets and hoods, so that the different pieces of the hair swap out appropriately. Because you can't just, when you pull the hood in, you have to actually get rid of like just the crown of the hair or the back of the hair, and we have to break it down into multiple pieces, and then we have to have swap logic to say, whenever you load this hood, it's this style of hood, it covers this thing, or helmets are a much worse case. You're like, this helmet just runs right along the bowl cut line, so now we need to have that lower section of the hair still visible, but we need to hide the upper section of the hair so we don't have to have the helmets be super bulky. So there's a lot of very specific problems when it comes to a lot of the helmets and hair, but for any of the helmets or hoods that we currently have in, we are working on fixes for those because that's something we should be able to address. It's just the ones that we don't have in right now we need a more complex system for.
I hear last time you tried to add masks, it resulted in headless people running around.
Yeah, I think there was something. I don't remember headless people running around. I remember faceless people running around at one period in time. We have a version of the head, the human heads, that has the mask, the section of the face removed where the masks go, because that's the only way you can load the masks in properly. And so if you load those on accident, it looks really creepy.
The other question I have is font size and trying to read the purple monsters. The purple wording on some of the monsters. I know that with the players right now, when you click on them, you get their name and their company at the top of the screen. You guys looking at doing that for the NPCs, or can we get the purple monsters, the wording outlined in gold or something, so we can see the contrast?
Yes, so we've talked about both of those things. I'm actually, I think there's a chance that that's something that I can fix, but I'm not certain. And regardless, it is something that we're conscious of, both the text, the purple text, and generally most of the places we use red text and blue text. The text is too saturated and too dark, and just blends into the background a lot of times. So I need to go see if I can change that. If not, I can work with programming to change it. I know that's one of those things that's a thorn in the side, and it's easy to let slide. So my apologies for that. But we will at least fix those font colors. We did talk about the over-the-head display for the NPCs, but I don't know for sure when we'll be able to do that. I am going to have to take off. I'm actually supposed to be at an event that I may be late for now, but that's okay.
Thank you very much, Mike. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.